Right, well, hello everyone. It's great to be back doing a webinar. It's been quite a while. We have such a good team now, Rich and Adam and Rodrigo doing webinars that in fact I can't remember when I last did one. But it's my pleasure now to introduce Dyalog version 18.2, new release of Dyalog APL, which should be ready and available for all of you within a very short time. Some of you have it already. There's quite a few topics to get through. I'm going to try and go fairly quickly through it, and then we'll be following up with webinars on many of the details after this one. So this is just going to be a quick introduction. Yeah, so release dates. Many of you, in fact, already have version 18.2. It was released to all of the users who have subscribed to the Dyalog support service about a week ago. And if all goes well, everybody else should have a copy by the middle of next week. One of the reasons why we've held it for everybody else other than the support users is that we found a little glitch. And although we now have, with version 18.2, in fact, a new patch mechanism under Windows, which means that on all platforms now, this was already true on all the other platforms than Windows, in fact. But now from 18.2, we're using Microsoft patch files under Windows, which means that we can update all parts of a Dyalog installation, including APL code, documentation, and so on, where the old patch system under Windows only updated executables. So the reason we've held it for the people who don't have the support service is we found a last-minute glitch. We decided to release it to everybody on support because we could easily ship a patch to them when everybody else gets it. But we decided to hold it back a bit so that the people who are not up for support will have that glitch resolved. I'll talk a little bit about exactly what it was a bit later. But in fact, this for the majority of users on Windows, this patch system may well be perhaps the most interesting feature of Dyalog version 18.2. I've certainly very much enjoyed using it during the beta process. Another sort of non-technical thing, not a feature of the product as such, is that we're introducing a new license we call the basic license to replace the old non-commercial license. And this is a license which is basically for all users except making significant money from using Dyalog APL. If you're making money using Dyalog APL, we would very much like a share of that and expect you to sign up for a commercial license. But if you are using or experimenting with Dyalog APL, you're very welcome to use the basic license for any one of the uses that are on this slide. So to be clear, the basic license replaces the existing free non-commercial license, and it allows you a little bit more than the old non-commercial license did. It allows you to redistribute Dyalog APL along with your own work, which was not allowed in the old non-commercial license, implying a default royalty license. So that's the royalty license, the default one, you owe 2% of the gross APL-based revenue for your application if you charge money for it. But if it's during a startup, or if the amount of money you're making is very small, the license fee is waived if your revenue is less than 5,000 British pounds in each calendar year. If you don't find the royalty license to fit your business well, of course, we have multiple alternative commercial license schemes that you can find on our website. All of our pricing is public and available for you to see on the site. If you want to use the free license, but you would like to have the support service, you can sign up for that separately for a small fee. Again, like the patch files, this may well turn out for many of you to be one of the most significant things about the new release, although it's non-technical. A lot of the new technical functionality in version 18.2 is related to using text files as source for APL applications. This is something we've been working on for more than a decade now, and in version 18.2 we're making some more significant strides in the direction of seeing text source really as first class source for APL applications, gradually replacing the old binary workspaces. One of the new ways that you can use textual source in version 18.2 is to use so-called shell scripts, a way of writing small applications that's very common particularly on Linux or Unixes. And in the white window that you can see on this script, there's on this slide, there's a a script. It starts with a hash and a bang, which is the way the operating system recognizes it as one of these scripts, and then the name of the interpreter that's going to run it, which is Dyalog script, and then the rest is just APL input as if you typed it into the session. So this defines a defun that's going to read input from standard input, and then it does a little bit of manipulation, and you can see at the bottom in the black window there's the actual use of this, piping in a file called Mississippi.txt, which contains the letters that we've just written to it, Mississippi, and computes a frequency count and outputs that to the session. So this is a way of writing very simple, well, they could be very complicated, but typically small applications that you use in combination with other operating system shell scripts, perhaps written in other languages, and you can pipe the input from one part of your system to another. So on a Linux system, user bin Dyalog script is the script interpreter. Under Windows, APLS files, which is the default extension for these files, are associated with the Dyalog script interpreter. So all you need to do, and I apologize for the tip that snuck into this screenshot, I didn't notice that until now. Hopefully you can see that we're just calling freak.apls and piping in Mississippi.txt. This is from a Windows command prompt, so it should work pretty much the same on all platforms. In addition to shell scripts, which are sort of really the new thing in 18.2, we've been working on using text source for APL functions, operators, namespaces, etc. for some years. And our main tool for enabling that is something called Link. Link is now version 3.0, shipped with Dyalog APL version 18.2. It's also available separately on GitHub if you want to get it from there. And this is a very significant new release. There's completely new documentation that's been written. It has a very large number of small features and bug fixes, and some major features. Again, I'll be following up on this in a subsequent webinar. But one of the most important things is that where in earlier versions of Link you couldn't really save a workspace that had textual source that had been brought in and have a good experience, Link 3.0 really supports that now. So you can save a workspace with containing functions that were brought in from file, and then if you load the workspace later and the sources have changed, there's a good resynchronization mechanism that will find out what's changed in the meantime and suggest what to do about it and help you quickly get back in sync. It has support for storing system variable settings as part of the source of your application, and in general a better, more documented API. But all of the documentation, including the change history, if you want to see the details, is available on GitHub. Link 3 or Link is a Git project which is fully transparent, open source. Here's a screenshot of the new documentation, just to give you an impression of what that looks like. The interpreter itself is also gradually increasing its ability to work directly with source files. Hopefully, eventually, we won't need tools like Link, but the interpreter will be able to directly work off source files. That's the ultimate goal, but it may take us a little while to get there. One of the features that was introduced in version 18.0 was that the load parameter for the interpreter can take the name of a function namespace or class file, and the APL interpreter itself, without using link, will be able to load the source and start running it if it conforms to the interpreter's expectations for something that it can run. In version 18.2 we make use of link to extend that so that you can simply refer to an entire directory with the load parameter, and link will then be used to bring in all of the source files in that folder, and if there is a function there called run, it will be invoked. So you can launch an entire application from textual script without using workspaces at all. There's a -x, like the xload parameter or the xload system command, where you can say, well, load it in, but don't execute run even if it's there. And this is the feature that we had a little bit of trouble with. We discovered there was a little bit of trouble with exactly how the interpreter and link were interacting at startup, and the reason why the full public release was delayed by a few more days. If you're using Microsoft Windows, this is something that we will try and do on other platforms as well, but there's so many different desktops out there that it's hard to do. It's more attractive on Windows, where there's really only one. We make use of this load parameter to integrate with Windows Explorer. So you can't quite see it here because the Windows 11 menu has popped up on top of the folder that we're looking at. But there is a function there in a file called main.aplf, and we've right-clicked on it and got a context menu up. And you can see at the top of the context menu there are three menu items that we have added during the installation. So you can click on a source file, you can typically edit it, you can load it with Dyalog, which means, you know, bring it into the workspace but don't run it, or you can run it. And that also applies to files containing individual functions, namespaces, etc., or an entire folder which would then be linked. Because this is now a much more capable piece of functionality, there's a file associations user command that has been greatly enhanced in version 18.2 to allow you to control exactly which version of Dyalog APL you want to use for this kind of integration, in case you have several versions of Dyalog APL installed. So this screenshot here shows at the top we've just asked for the status of file associations, and we get a list of which instances are which versions of Dyalog APL are installed. And then details of the current associations, and we can see here that I've got them set up for my classic system because I wanted to test that for a while, but the source preview is connected to the Unicode version because it's only the Unicode version that's able to do source preview within Windows Explorer. And then I can say file associations and give it a version identification, and that'll switch all the associations over to another version. And if you'd rather have a graphical user interface, you can just type file associations and no arguments, and then you'll get this GUI to guide you through your choices and select options. So Docker support or using containers is also something that we see as just becoming more and more important. Makes it very much easier to integrate all kinds of APL development with continuous integration pipelines or deploying applications on the cloud. And the Docker support in version 18.2 is significantly improved. First of all, you no longer need to attach an interactive terminal as you had to do in earlier versions of Dyalog APL. Version 18.2 is happy to run completely headless, which simplifies the starting and the operation of containers. And you can also launch these containers directly on source files. So the example the screenshot we can see here is under Linux. We're looking at a file called hello world.aplf, which contains the source code for a function called hello world. And the way the default Dyalog Docker container is set up, if you mount a volume containing some APL code, it could be a workspace, so in this case it's a folder. If you mount that into the container with the name app, then when the container starts, it's going to set up the load parameter and launch the APL interpreter on that. So what this example shows is that if you have either a folder or a single piece of APL source that you would like to run, you don't even need to have Dyalog APL installed at all if you have Docker installed, because you can invoke APL directly on the source code through a container. And of course you can create your own, you can derive your own containers from ours and make much more complicated things. The public containers are also under the basic license, so if you make use of one of these public containers, you can do that under the same terms as the basic license. If you then derive from it and publish your own work based on these containers, you must include our license file in a prominent location so that anybody who uses your containers also becomes aware of the licensing terms. That's all that we ask. And of course the royalty license applies if you're charging for your work. So in addition to, actually RIDE version 4 is not part of Dyalog version 18.2, but it's something that is the new version was timed to be shipped together with version 18.2. RIDE is our remote IDE, so it's on all non-Windows platforms. It's the IDE of choice, and it's still catching up a bit to the Windows IDE. RIDE version 4.4 takes another few important steps closer. It can debug multi-threaded applications, which of course is something that you find very often if you're using Linux in Docker containers to deploy service applications. They tend to be multi-threaded. So that's a very important addition. Where previously RIDE it knew about the latest version of Dyalog APL, the new version of RIDE actually communicates with the interpreter to find out which version it is and provides language bar help and so on, language specific information that's adapted to the actual Dyalog version that you're using. And it can save responses to prompts. I'll show you a screenshot of what that means. That's actually very important in practice. Again, RIDE is an open source project, and you can follow it on GitHub and see all of the issues. You can report issues and follow the work that's being done on RIDE. So this is a screenshot of the threads menu. So you can see that we have all the same menu items for debugging threads as you'll find in the Windows IDE. This shows that if you go and ask for the Dyalog help, you'll get something that's relevant to your version of APL. There's a new find and replace feature, and there's much more of the same kind of status information that you may be used to if you've been using the Windows IDE. The stuff colored red here in the status bar. So RIDE is sort of gradually getting closer and closer to the Windows IDE in functionality. This is the remembering of prompts, very important feature in Windows that I have personally sorely missed when working with Linux, that there are a number of prompts that you would get over and over again, and it's really nice to be able to save the settings as you can in Windows, and you have this dialog box where you can remove your preferences again if you should change your mind about the remembered questions. And then of course with every release of Dyalog APL there are a number of new extensions, system functions, etc. to make you a more productive APL developer. The JSON conversion tool that converts between APL arrays and JSON arrays has a new feature to allow you to convert an APL matrix, which is a data structure which isn't supported in JSON. You can't have two-dimensional arrays. But of course, it's very common that you have a structure like the one you can see on the left here, where you've got a matrix with column names and then records. And you want to produce something like the JSON on the right, where each record is an object with the column name and the value, because that's what a JavaScript application is going to be expecting, and programs written in many other languages. And the way this has been done is that you can, in fact, we support 3 or 4 various ways of arranging this. You can have a matrix with fields in the first row and then the values, as you can see at the bottom left here. But of course, in applications, you may have something more like a vector of columns and a vector of vectors of column values. And that's what the example here shows, is that we have a scalar 4, which is the format number 4, and then the columns and the fields. And that's all that QuadJSON needs in order to know that, because an enclosed scalar, again, is a data structure that is not supported by JSON. That is used to indicate that here comes a table in format number 4, and JSON will produce the expected JSON. This extension to Quad80X is something that I've been waiting for a very long time also. We have in APL, historically, we've accumulated a very large number of system functions like the ones named on the left-hand side of this table, quad size, quad name class, etc. And we've been trying to design for many years a sort of a single metadata function where you could ask for all sorts of facts about a name or about a data structure. And Quad80X in version 18.2 is just the beginning. There are many more types of metadata that we're going to be adding to Quad80X. If you have something you're missing, please let us know. And I should also add that in addition to collecting these things in one place, there's also been a problem in the past that some of these system functions on the left would give an error if they were passed a type of name or type of data that they were not designed to work on. Whereas Quad80X will always return a result of some form. So you don't have to use error trapping to determine the type of the data that you've passed in. If you're into generating random numbers, but the linear distribution is not what you're looking for, there's an experimental feature. It's currently available as an IBeam, 16808 IBeam. And it takes as its right argument the name of a distribution. I think we currently support about a dozen commonly used nonlinear distributions. And here we are asking for 100,000 numbers in the beta distribution with parameters 2, 5 input parameters to the beta distribution. And then there's a little bit of code here that divides, computes the frequency in bucket size of 100 so that we can plot a chart and see how this data is distributed. So again, this is something we're looking for feedback on, and whether you find this useful or there are distributions that we're missing, etc. Please let us know. And then there's also a bit for existing applications. This is something that some people have actually been asking us for quite a while. We found the time to do it in 18.2. There hasn't been a way in a grid object to set the color of the top left corner. Now you can do that. And a feature that I've in fact already used in Anger is the fire once property on a timer. So if you want to have a timer object that only fires once without your having to code logic to turn it off after it's fired. That's now very easy to do. There are a whole bunch of new user commands. One of the most popular ones is this get command, which accepts, I think Adam is going to do a whole presentation on this. I know he's already mentioned it a few times. It accepts an enormous variety of arguments. In this case, it's a reference to some source code which is out on GitHub. And it'll bring it into the workspace. In this case, it's a folder, so it brings in a namespace. And we can put some data into it. And then if we're wondering what is it we found, there's a names user command. The right argument, I think 0 means all name classes. And we can inspect our workspace. We have these variables that were created on the previous slide, the example working with distributions. And we now have a namespace called stats, which we can then peek into and see what names have been defined. So we got some statistical functions fetched from GitHub just with this one invocation of a user command. There's Apple Cart, which is something that has been growing and growing. It's a way of asking for tips on how to do something in APL. It's getting more and more capable. You just type Apple Cart and then some words. So for example, in this case, how do you compute a generalized mean in APL? And it'll suggest some code to you if it has anything. It can find, if it doesn't find anything, you then write to us and tell us you were searching for this and it wasn't found, and usually it takes a short amount of time before it finds its way into the database. So in this case, it's I'm happy with this because I'm not much of a tacit guy, so I'd rather have the second expression that's suggested here, the defun. So I create that function and we see so the generalized mean of, I don't know what the left argument is, it the level, the 1 is an average, 2 is the quadratic mean, so the square root of the average of the squares, and the harmonic mean is the reciprocal of the average of the reciprocals. Very useful. There's a user command called represent, which allows you to represent data in a wide variety of formats. So for example, here we have a little matrix and we say, please represent that in JSON. And it does the best it can. JSON can't quite represent a 2-dimensional matrix, so we get a 3-element vector of 4-element vectors. We can also have it represented in XML. Of course, XML can't really represent something like this at all, so it comes up with the format where we produce some XML that an application written in another programming language could use to read the data with the shape and the list. There's a wide variety of formats. There's so if you had brought in the tacit version of the generalized mean, you can use format equals APL to have it formatted a bit better. So if we apply format equals APL to the matrix, it creates an APL expression that could be used to generate that value. If you apply the representation to this tacit form, it says, well, what would you type in order to produce this in APL? And that displays it with parentheses to make it a little bit easier to learn tacit programming. So if you had a look at this and compared it to the defun, you could use that as a good learning tool on your journey towards tacit programming, if that's what you'd like to do. And then there's a view user command which pops the result up of I'm not sure whether this will work with any user command, but certainly with a number of user commands. Pops it up in a window so you can have it lying around for a bit. So that's really the overview of version 18.2. It's you know, there's no major language features in here, but I think it's a very it has a lot of stuff that's going to make it easier to develop modern applications and integrate them into tool chains and pipelines. Yes, so are there any questions? I'm looking in the chat. I see nothing. So either it was crystal clear or completely uninteresting. Or I'm not connected to the internet. And as I said, there'll be follow-up webinars on pretty much all of the topics that I've mentioned here, going into much more detail with live demonstrations. So yeah, I actually, Connor mentions that one of the most important features of Ride is the new color schemes, the Dracula scheme and other dark, I think mostly dark modes. And yeah, I did mention that in my roadmap presentation at the last Dyalog user meeting, but I didn't put that slide up here. I apologize for that. And Davin asks whether the new patch process means that we won't have to uninstall and reinstall, and that is exactly right. It is so wonderful. You just download a zip file containing an executable and an MSP file, and you click on the executable and it updates all parts of Dyalog APL that everything that was installed in a single click, whereas in the past you had to update the executables and then you had to get hold of Conga somewhere else and so on. Now we can update everything in a single click. On the other platforms, of course, you typically use DPKG or something like that, which has always updated the entire installation. But under Windows, there have been far more moving parts historically on Windows, and therefore we didn't have this mechanism until now. There's a question about performance. So the performance of 18.2 is pretty much identical to 17.1, the previous release before 18.0. So 18.0 was significantly faster, but we found, and unfortunately our customers found early on, that there were problematic edge cases in some of the tuned algorithms, and we're going to be putting the tuned, or not all of it, but much of the tuning will eventually find its way back into Dyalog APL. But we need to do testing in a completely different way from what was done for version 18.1, oh sorry, 18.0. before we can put it all back in. How does the generalized mean function deal with negative numbers, asks Tony Corso. I don't know. It was an example of how to use Apple Cart. I've never had any use for the generalized mean. I've usually needed one or the other, and it's pretty easy to write it. I think the generalized mean function is something you would use in a math class, teaching about the concept of generalized mean. Was there an absolute number in there somewhere? Absolute value? Nope. So that looks like it could quite easily fail. Okay, I see Andy has added a comment about the patching. Okay, so the patch mechanism only works within a version. So if you've installed Dyalog version 18.2 and you have the Dyalog support service, we issue patches every now and again, and they will patch your 18.2. When we get to 19.0, we won't be using a patch to install that, because it might have much too big differences, and for it to make sense just to replace a few files, we might need to delete files, which I think the patch mechanism struggles a bit with. Yep. I think that was everything that came to me via chat. I have to look over to one side to see it. Looks like that was maybe the end. I'll sit here and smile until Rich tells me we're done. Now, version 19 is going to have dramatic new stuff, but that's not what this webinar is about. That seems it to be it, says Rich. So I will thank you for listening, and come back and see the detailed walkthroughs of all the bits. Thank you very much. See you next time.